It looks more and more like Sir Keir Starmer might be an incredibly authoritarian man. There were signs of it before the election, after he faced very strong allegations that he threatened Speaker Lindsay Hoyle over a Gaza ceasefire vote. When he was in opposition, he wanted harder, faster, longer lockdowns as well, didn't he? He's appointed Sue Gray as well as his chief of staff, and she's already faced bullying allegations and claims that she brought some staff to tears. Now, in the wake of the Southport attack and subsequent disorder, he appeared to lean on the judges to give out long sentences.
We're able to demonstrate the criminal justice system working speedily. So yesterday you saw the sentencing of individuals who've been involved in disorder days ago, some of them getting sentences as long as 3 years. That sent a very powerful message.
The Home Office then appeared to commit contempt of court by already finding everyone guilty, despite them not yet having a trial. Now, we've seen a marked increase in facial recognition technology being rolled out as well, haven't we? And today, when faced with the very serious allegation of cronyism, cash for access, sleaze, even borderline corruption, he just arrogantly dismisses it.
Most of these allegations and accusations are coming from the very people that dragged our country down in the first place. So you'll forgive me if I take that approach to it. But I'm not really going to take lectures on this from the people who dragged our country so far down in the last few years. Thank you.
Today we witness something that is straight out of the authoritarian playbook, OK? Claiming that things are so unbelievably bad because of your political opponents that it justifies Starmer taking really extreme action going forward.
But I have to be honest with you. Things are worse than we ever imagined. Things will get worse before they get better. I'll have to turn to the country and make big asks of you as well, to accept short-term pain for long-term good, the difficult trade-off for the genuine solution.
It's actually quite a skillful tactic, that, because that allows him to get away with lying in the run-up to the election. He can claim that the reality has changed and that what he promised then does not apply now. It also allows him to ignore his own role in the economic mess, borrowing £3.1 billion to pay the unions while callously taking winter fuel payments away from pensioners. And then there's how he treats the media, isn't there? In the run-up to the election, he needed GB News viewers to vote for him. So he courted you. Now he doesn't. So he ignores you. He's answered one of our political editor, Christopher Hope's questions just one time out of 5 press conferences since becoming PM. And today it looks like Ofcom will get more powerful. They suddenly need emergency powers to crack down on so-called misinformation online. Now, hey, look, some people will say...
That was a boring speech by a boring man dealing with the boring business of getting Britain back on its feet. And if you don't like that, you don't like Britain. If you don't want him to succeed, you don't want Britain to succeed.
Other people might think that Keir Starmer is becoming increasingly authoritarian while wielding a big majority and no opposition. And that is concerning stuff. Let's get the thoughts of my panel this evening. It's columnist and broadcaster Esther Kraku. We also have the director of the Centre of Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolfe. And we also have journalist Jonathan Liss. Esther, I'll start with you on this. I mean, I have quite significant concerns, in case you couldn't tell, about how authoritarian Keir Starmer actually is the more we get to know him in power.
Well, I think authoritarian is probably the best word, because I don't think anyone expected this sort of institutionalization of our basic freedoms, right? So this whole kind of, it's technically called depoliticization, which isn't actually the removing of politics, but removing key institutions that are central to politics from political actors, from political influence. So by saying you have the, Ofcom gets to decide what's misinformation, what's hate. Well, the British public that it affects don't get to decide, because Ofcom is free from the influence of the public. Just like, the Bank of England and all these institutions that make key decisions on the lives of people in this country, but are removed from actually any sort of accountability. And this is what I call lazy politics, because it removes politicians from having to make those difficult decisions, from having to listen to the public, from having to have rigorous debate. And what in the long term happens is you see people disengaging more and more from politics. They think, what's the point? Because we vote for one thing, we don't get that. politicians used to blame the EU. Now that we're out of the EU, they say, oh, we have to relegate it to Ofcom, or we have to relegate it to the Bank of England, all these other institutions. So people just think, what is the point? And more, Britain becomes unrecognisable. The idea of having some external body deciding what is misinformation or hate, and then potentially having the police show up at your doorstep, when you can't even have the police show up for a burglary, is just going to drive Britain down a dark path. And unfortunately, I think Keir Starmer has really got it wrong here.
Is he on a power trip?
Oh, absolutely, but I think all politicians are on a power trip who are in that position of power as a Prime Minister. But my concern is there's a systemic, institutional authoritarianism that's coming across our political elite. It's been going for a number of years. As Esther has quite rightly said, the use of organisations like Ofcom, the Bank of England, and all these variety of quangos that are coming out as though these people are the great and good. Actually, they're the poor and the weak. They're the stupid and the arrogant. They're the snobs of our society who look down upon people. Anybody in those positions of power and should actually be removed. And I have no respect for those people. I've met many of them at dinner parties. I've met many of them at institutions who say, look at me, I'm trying to help the world. But actually you're not. The thing that you dislike the most is the general public.
You see, the thing is, it wouldn't even be that bad if they were accountable.
People who think for themselves, and that's why you hated Brexit, that's why you hated the referendum, because you believed you made those decisions. And all the manager, Keir Starmer, is doing, and that's all he is a managerial class, all he's trying to do is manage all these institutional systemic snobs that are running these non-governmental organisations and think.
We've been on air for a few minutes. We've had a Jonathan Les eye roll. I'm going to just fire it over to you, Jonathan. Just say, look, you know, quite arrogantly just swatting away quite serious allegations of cronyism and corruption, the kind of which would have bogged down the Tories for months and months, no doubt. There, batting that off, batting off, not taking questions from us here at GB News when what we were going to ask him, as I'm pretty sure he will have known, was have you done anything at all to consider cutting down on immigration since we had all of these protests? Is he actually quite dangerously authoritarian?
No, I don't think he's dangerously authoritarian. Also, Stephen, I don't think that people were... I think we can have good faith arguments about Brexit, OK? I have good faith arguments about Brexit, about why people voted Brexit. Can't we just accept that people on the Remain side might not all have been snobs who wanted to put down the working class? They might actually thought it was in our interest to be in the European Union.
I'm actually saying those people in the institutions running them.
But there's no evidence that Ofcom was not a pro-EU organisation. I think
what he's referring to...
It's just a distraction. Look, as I've said to you many times, Patrick, I'm very prepared to criticise Starmer. I think he's done what I think he's doing wrong. I think he's naturally quite an authoritarian person. I don't think he can become the head of the Director of Public Prosecutions without having a slightly authoritarian streak. And I think that he's been incredibly ruthless in how he's treated the left of his party, for example. That doesn't mean that every single decision he takes as Prime Minister is going to be wrong. And I thought it was important today that he said his government was not going to be perfect, for example. So look, there are things.
So he's warning us of his authoritarianism.
There are things in his speech that I agreed with. There are things that I think that were wrong, and I think it would be silly of me to kind of just take a tribal position and just try and say that everything he did was right.
I think the bigger concern here is the homogeneity of the kinds of people that are in these non-governmental institutions, these quangos, these Bank of Englands, these Ofcoms, because they all think the same and they're not accountable to the British public. Those are the two main issues. If all of those people reflected the British public's opinions in equal measure and they were accountable to the British public, who give the government the power to even give these people any sort of authority, that would be fine. But you see people getting more and more removed from politics because they know the type of person they're going to meet in these.
But Ofcom is obviously accountable to the government ultimately. It's not
government to the people.
No.
Well, exactly.
Can I just come back in here on something? So I just want to keep it quite focused to the things he said today. And I think that there was, for me, something straight out of the authoritarian playbook, which was, I'm going to stand here now, I'm going to over-reg how absolutely catastrophically awful everything was before, blame everything on my opponents. I'm not saying everything was great, far from it, but the extent to which he's now saying, we could have had no idea it was as bad as this, and now the promises I made to you when I asked you to vote for me don't apply anymore. We're going to have to rip everything up and start again. And that to me is quite dangerous.
It's also
it is
disingenuous.
Absolutely dangerous, but it's also dishonest because he did have access to the OBR's records. They did have access to the government. They've had, through his chief of staff, the ability to understand all the documents that related to the economy behind that as well. So for him to say that the things were worse than it actually is is untrue.
It's also
What makes it
ahistorical.
worse?
Well, the
It's
OBR did produce a letter that said that actually they didn't know all the
That's
details.
But it's
if
also
things had actually
ahistorical.
gone and been implemented by the Conservative
Look, I think that
Party.
it's-
See, the problem with it is that, to an extent, though, Patrick, the Conservative Party did that themselves when they said that Labour left a note saying there was no money left when they come in. So we have to watch this, but it is dangerous for people to say, I've got to change everything, and therefore I'll ignore what I said.
And none of the promises he made matter, which is the
No,
bigger
but
issue.
that's not true, Esther, because
But
even
that's what
today...
it is.
No, but it's not true, though, is it? Because, look, I think that any kind of threat of austerity is completely wrong. It's not the answer. It won't deliver any kind of desired outcomes. If there's one thing we should have learned from the coalition, it's
So
that.
why is he
but
doing
they're
it?
not going to actually break manifesto commitments. They're not going to raise VAT or income tax or national insurance. That Starmer reiterated today. That would be suicidal to do that. So I've seen that
So
there'll
it's
be
not
taxes.
suicidal to
Can I-
take
can
away
I
the
also
winter
just
fuel
ask-
payment.
I don't think it's suicidal. I think it was a mistake. I think it was suicidal.
Can I also just ask this? You know, there's the idea now that Keir Starmer currently doesn't have an opposition, basically for a couple of reasons. Both Parliament is not sitting and the Tories are in a complete mess and Reform aren't big enough and the Lib Dems aren't in opposition, are they? I don't even know where they are at the moment, right? So there's that
Probably
side.
in Cabo.
There's that side of it, right? So there's no opposition to anything. He's got a big majority. He can force things through. But can I just round us off on this discussion by... I actually just thought that was catastrophically awful leadership today. We have a bloke who is leading this country, who stood up outside his own house in his back garden, called the entire media there, the world's media will have been watching it, and he told everyone how flipping awful Britain is and how it's going to get even worse. Why would anyone in their right minds with a bit of money or a bit about them stick around here? That is the opposite of what you want from a leader.
He didn't
isn't
say
it?
the country was bad. He said it had been governed badly and had been left in a terrible state, which is
Things
true.
are going to get worse. It's
Now this
terrible.
I
It's
disagree
awful.
with. This I disagree with. I think that you need to give people hope.
Yeah.
We have an entire generation in Britain now who have never known any kind of hope, who
Who I would encourage to leave.
who don't think,
Next
as
opportunity.
every single generation pretty much the last 100 years has thought we're going to have it better than our parents did, and this is the first generation that's basically become habituated to the fact that they're not going to have it
I think
worse.
for the last 25 years,
Right.
people have not had hope in this
Well, I
country.
think it's particularly
And that's
since
the end of-
since the crash.
Well, it's prior to that. It was the end of the Labour Party. Then we've had a couple of financial crashes. Then we've had COVID. Then we've had the devastation on our economy
People
caused
are
by the
sick
Ukraine
of
war.
being told constantly.
And we're constantly
Sorry, this
told
is
it's
awful.
really
We're going
bad.
to have to do something about this.
But
you know.
then we look across into the United States and we see how they're flying. The difference between them and us is palpable. If most people had the opportunity to go to the United States and get a job over there, they would.
Yep,
tell
I
you
would.
They would.
Hand on heart,
Hand on
absolutely.
heart. There's more money over
Seriously.
there in like I've seen builders over there that were paid the same level as bankers over here.
You look, you know, you want a leader, and you've got James O'Brien, who's fair play, you know, I know it sounds very often, coming out and taking that stance, which is that's a boring man delivering a boring speech, getting on with the boring task of government, etc. I would argue that wrapped up in all of that were some untruths. Actually, it was quite an authoritarian streak and a lot of misery and doom and gloom. And I don't know if that's what we really want from a leader. But anyway.